We have that community. Come, ask a question in the platform. Hey, I'm struggling. I've been depressed. I've been drinking at work. Does anybody have any ideas or solutions on maybe ways that I can engage with my boss in a meaningful way? And then the community can offer some suggestions. Like, how powerful could that really be?
We're in a very high pressure industry. It's a great industry. It rewards you monetarily for your hard work, but I don't think anybody likes having production pressure put on them. And we're in a hard market right now, and we only have so many hours in a day. I think that the insurance industry, by and large, is very susceptible for a lot of this stuff to manifest itself in a way that it hasn't in the past, just on current market conditions.
My life was saved about 22 years ago by a couple fraternity brothers who stepped in during my suicide attempt.
I'm a pretty direct dude, man. Like, if I've got a problem with something, I'm just going to deal with it. I don't hide behind anything. I don't paint rosy pictures or whatever. So for me, I'm an open book. I'm going to tell you everything that you want to hear, and probably a lot that you don't want to hear at the same time. And it's just never really bothered me, because I am who I am, and I know I'm not for everybody, but for the people I am for, we have great bonds and great relationship.
If I go home and I had a terrible day, that's going to change the conversation with my kids, my family, my spouse, my parents. And then maybe I don't work out, maybe I eat bad, I sleep bad, and then I wake up and it's a repeatable cycle. And I come back to work grumpy, annoyed, frustrated. Maybe I drank too much. So again, it's trying to give tools, community aspects to help kind of break the cycle, knowledge and resources.
There's not as much of a personal relationship with people as there used to be, because back when I was a kid, you played outside with your friends. You walked to the school bus and you rode the bus with your friends, and you played Little League with your friends. You weren't playing online games. You didn't have your face buried in a phone. What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Power Producers Podcast, where we are refining and redefining the sales game. And honestly, sometimes when you are redefining something, you really need to do that and go outside the box and talk about things that, people just aren't comfortable talking about all the time. And it leads to bigger problems when things get ignored. And I've seen an increase in the openness of people who have struggled with various things, even, on LinkedIn, which is becoming a more personal platform. I'm not saying that it's completely personal, but people are sharing a lot more about their personal lives on LinkedIn as opposed to just what's happening in business. And I've seen everything from people who have struggled with alcoholism to substance abuse to mental health open up, in the response that they get, the engagement they get is amazing, in a good way, a very good way. And so our guests today are Brendan Core and Justin Goodman. Brendan from Lost Runs Pro, and Justin from Total CSR, two services that we use here at Florida Risk Partners and advocate for to the killing commercial agencies. But we're not going to talk about those products today. Actually, Brendan reached out to me about a project that he and Justin are working on, and just said, hey, I'd love to have the opportunity to talk to you about this. And we decided, why not just go ahead and share it with everybody? I mean, I can share it with one, or we could share it with 50,000. Which one's going to be better if we're trying to bring awareness to something? So, we're going to talk about a topic that it doesn't get talked about a lot, I don't think, on podcasts. And of the times that I have heard it talked about, I don't know that it's been raw. I think it's been more, hey, let me put something out here to talk about mental health because it'll get me downloads and more money with my sponsors. And since I don't take sponsors for my podcast, that's not even a possibility. So the only option we have is to have real conversation. And I have been very open. I'm open every time I speak publicly. And I even did what is now likely the most downloaded episode of this podcast, talking about how my greatest affliction is my greatest superpower. And that is the fact that at 42 years old, I was diagnosed with ADHD and had no idea for 42 years that I was dealing with that. And once I had a diagnosis and understood some of the triggers and some of the symptoms and all of that, the rest of my life made sense. All the times I got in trouble at home or school or everything else was normal. And so it's interesting to me. And I'm actually very excited to have this conversation because I think it's something that we do need to be able to be comfortable talking about. We do need to be able to address. But, for those of you who have heard me speak in a public forum, you know that I open up every time saying that I should come with a shirt that has a warning label on it because this is getting ready to be a roller coaster ride. And, I have ADHD. I don't take medicine for it because I've learned how to manage it. And I feel like it is actually a superpower. But at the end of the day, by me being open about that and so willing to talk to people about what it's been like, I actually spoke at in Ohio at the Big I, right the same week the hurricane hit, and I spent 2 hours after I was done talking with a single file line of people who just wanted to say, "Hey, man, I've got ADHD, I've got ADD. How do you do this? How do you do that?" And it was mind blowing to me to see how many people really needed some advice or wanted, I shouldn't say needed, but probably did need, but wanted some advice and felt comfortable enough because I was willing to be vulnerable and say that, talk about my situation that they wanted to hear what I had to say. So all that to say, that's what I envision this conversation being like today. We're going to talk, kind of with Brendan and Justin about what led them to go down the road that they're going down. And then we're going to talk about some really cool resources that they have put together and more that are going to be on the way for those of you who may be struggling or know someone who is that really could have need somebody to reach out to. So glad to have you. Both you guys have been on before. Thanks for coming back. Brendan, real quick, just sort of give the overview. What led you to get involved in this project with Justin?
DC, I love it, man. I appreciate the opportunity, the platform, man. This is great. I mean, I'm certainly very open on LinkedIn, which is, one of the ways that you and I have also connected kind of just outside of that. And you're absolutely right. It's some of the things I talk about online, they're the most engaged posts,
That have nothing to do with what you do for a living though, right?
No, which also gets plenty of engagement, but you talk about alcoholism, you talk about ADHD, depression, anxiety, and it's, kind of Pandora's box because there are so many people who I think also are craving kind of just like a real person on LinkedIn because we all struggle. We all put on this persona that, hey, life is amazing. And it certainly is a lot of the time. But we also know it's not always amazing and we all struggle, right? We're all living in our own world. So by talking about that, that's how Justin and I got connected. We did a couple mental health panels or mental health panel together, which then we kind of connected. We had some offline chats and then he was like, hey, I've kind of got this crazy idea. Like, what do you think about embarking and kind of developing this whole mental health, and what we now have is Project 55. And with my background, and it felt like an opportunity that I couldn't say no to because it's a passion of mine. It's why my life is good today because I got the help I needed. And so it gives me an opportunity to give back in a meaningful way. And also in a way that like I can continue to learn as well. And that's half the battle of kind of these mental health topics that we will talk about is constantly evolving and constantly learning. And so that's kind of why I said yes, so that's why I'm here, man. I want to continue these conversations and help other people.
I think there's been such a willingness to look the other way on some of this stuff that people don't realize just how many people can and are affected by it. And I think that, by giving people a platform or being open enough to talk about it on a platform when given the opportunity only, it helps. I imagine, Brendan, it helps you, number one, because, it gives you some sort of a sense of fulfillment, I would imagine, if you're able to tell your story and know that your story has an impact on somebody else, who may be struggling with the same thing. And a lot of times, especially with social or even in a podcast like this, you're reaching people you don't even realize, that you only know about the ones who come out and say, hey, man, I saw this post, or I did this, or I did that. But
Yeah.
for every one of those, there's 8 or 9 of them who heard your message that also were impacted, that for whatever reason don't reach out. So I would tell you guys, if you're listening to this today and you hear something that resonates with you, by all means, drop an email or a direct message or whatever, and just reach out and connect with whoever it is that said what connected with you, because I think that that could be the first step in helping you, or building a relationship that'll help you down the road. But I would highly encourage it, because it's not something, I think, I'm a pretty direct dude, man. Like, if I've got a problem with something, I'm just going to deal with it. I don't hide behind anything. I don't paint rosy pictures or whatever. So for me, I'm an open book. I'm going to tell you everything that you want to hear, and probably a lot that you don't want to hear at the same time. And it's just never really bothered me, because I am who I am, and I know I'm not for everybody, but for the people I am for, we have great bonds and great relationships. But I feel like when you go through things like that, if you don't use that as an opportunity to help other people, that you really aren't doing the most to maximize your own purpose either.
Without a doubt. Um, because I also owe a lot of how I got here to other people who were kind enough to listen, to help. And so it's without a doubt one of the easiest and best ways that I can give back to others who are struggling. And when we do these, and I do these, or, you know, I might not hear from anybody, but then, I'll give you an example. When I lived in Seattle, I was kind of doing some Instagram stuff, and I was posting all these. I didn't hear from somebody until like recently, like 6 months ago, who said, hey, by the way, I wanted to tell you, I ended up getting sober about, 9 or 10 months ago. So they're probably over a year now, but I had no idea that they were even following along, and they just heard things that resonated with them. And so when they needed the help, and then they took the time to reach out and say, hey, your message was important at that time. I don't care if I hear from anybody. I certainly would love to, because that means it's impactful and that they are willing to have a conversation. But these conversations, and the reason we've built this, is because people who are struggling often struggle in silence, because they don't have a community, they don't have the resources, and they don't know what the next steps are. And that is, talk about the epitome of being able to give back and make a difference in somebody's life.
Yeah. So Justin, what's your take? I mean, what led you to reach out to Brendan to start this project to begin with?
So, just a brief bit of background. So, my life was saved about 22 years ago by a couple fraternity brothers who stepped in during my suicide attempt,
Hmm.
and they intervened in such a way that not only saved my life, but also they did so in a way that was kind, caring, truthful, and really basically said, Justin, you're going to have to get the help you need. We're going to your parents. And keep in mind, these are immature college kids, right? We're 20 years old. And they said, you're either going to them or we're going to them. You're going to go home. You're going to get this work through. We'll support you the whole way. But what I didn't know at the time is one of them had dealt with this in their family.
Hmm.
And so he was already equipped and trained in some ways to step in. And so he had identified the signs. And so that started a long journey for me of kind of recovering through that, and ultimately discovering not only did I have ADHD, but I had type 2 bipolar disorder,
Hmm.
which I didn't understand, and the implications of that for my family. But also going forward, between running my agencies and then launching Total CSR and all the agencies I work with, the conversations continued to come up around people and what they're struggling with and how to step in. And so ultimately, I found myself at conferences speaking more and more on mental health. And after being on the panel with Brandon, it was something where I had lost another acquaintance to taking his own life after losing this battle with depression. And I'm like, we've got to be doing something. And so I reached out to Brennan and a couple others, and I'm like, here's my idea. And it was in a LinkedIn message. It was, this is what it is. Here's my verbal vomit. I want to get this done. Who's coming with me? And actually, Brendan's enthusiasm and excitement is what got it across the finish line, because candidly, it was a very scary thing for me. Although I was speaking at conferences and talking openly about my struggles, it's quite another thing to then say, okay, we're going to go forth, launch this nonprofit, and do this thing in a very public way, and hopefully land the plane properly.
Yeah, it's a big difference from talking about it for 30 minutes to an hour every once in a while to eating, sleeping, and breathing it every day as you try and launch it, right? I
Yeah.
mean, I can't even imagine what it would be like dealing. I mean, like, number one, I know what it's like dealing with an e-learning platform to some extent, with balancing running an agency and everything else. I can't imagine what it would be like to do all of that and then throw something else into the mix. In addition to it, the ADHD part of me certainly understands that and would thrive in that environment, which is why I have my hands in so many things. But, you know, I just, kudos to you, man, for pushing through, because you got a lot on your plate already, and to be willing to take something like this on, obviously comes across as a passion and a purpose play way more than a profit play in any way, shape, or form, right? So I think that's really cool, and thank you for sharing your story. So talk a little bit about what you guys are doing with setting up the nonprofit, in sort of how that's packaged and how people can get engaged with it.
Yeah, so we have really three phases that we're working in. Phase one was with Project 55, building out an online community where people can get the right information that they may not be able to get from their own agency, finding online for a variety of reasons, stigma, or just even the agency's lack of consolidating all this information that they need. So we need an online community that we've built for people to go get the right information, have a safe place where we can have conversations. And I will say this, we are a 501c3 nonprofit. We are not asking for anyone's money. We're a 501c3 nonprofit because I needed something separate so people understood this was not a business play for Justin. Um, but the training and what we're going to be developing, nothing will ever be charged to these people. It is not that type of project. But that said, what we are trying to do is solve the problem for those individuals out there who are called to support their coworkers and even people outside of their agencies who are struggling with mental health. And right now, there are some trainings that exist there on a very high level, but they're not paint by numbers. And so right now your option is, if I need therapy, I'm going to wait 3 to 6 months till I can get into a therapist because there aren't enough therapists. And then I have to be able to afford said therapist, who most of the time won't accept insurance these days. Or I'm going to talk to some random friends, or I'm going to confide in a coworker. The problem is that coworker doesn't know what to and what not to say, and often won't engage when they see someone struggling. And so what we are building now, phase two, is really this mental health first responder training. We are going to equip individuals within agencies to be able to not only identify and understand the variety of mental health disorders and struggles, but also equip them with the tools to help those individuals through those processes in the short term, and then positively redirect them to the appropriate resources and follow up in a way that is first doing no harm, but is really going to get them to where they can get on that road to recovery. And so this is something that's going to be distributed far and wide. It's going to probably be about April time when we launch it. It's going to be a 6-hour comprehensive training. I will say this, and Brendan has now seen the detailed outline of the course. It is the most comprehensive training that has ever existed for the lay person as far as equipping them to support someone on the mental health space. It's going to be absolutely free. On the training side for the total CSR customers, it'll be native because I can then get out to 50,000 people overnight. For everyone else, we'll have a different access point. It will also be free. And that's really phase two. Can we get enough people equipped to then be able to support their coworkers? But then I also know about our insurance community we are the greatest distribution network out there. It's why every insurtech ultimately realizes they have to go back to the agencies. And if you can imagine with every agency out there having 1,000 customers, 1,500 customers, what if we went to them and said, oh, by the way, you've been through this training now, go and give this to your customers for free, and we can distribute this training across the board and using agencies as that mechanism. Phase 3 of what we're working on, and we have an NDA in place, so I can't speak too much to it, but there are Gen AI tools out there, one in particular that we've been in discussions with, that will get you 80% of the way of talking to a therapist and stepping in when you need it. The problem is they need 1,000 minimum users to make it happen. And so phase 3 is, as we get people through this training, we want to be able to make this available to all of our members, users, etc., so they have a very low cost way, and by low cost I'm talking like $1 a month, that when they are struggling with a mental health issue and they don't have a friend around, they can sit on their phone and they can do it. And the technology is so advanced, and they have the studies now behind it. It's been about 4 to 5 years of studies behind it, that it will infer based upon the cadence of how you're talking, certain keywords, when you need immediate professional help from somebody. And so it will redirect you a hotline. So it identifies that where you yourself may not know how close to the edge you are, but the app can step in there. And again, it's going to get people 80% of the way there and hopefully give enough time and enough resources so that by the time they can get the mental health through a properly trained professional, that they are around to see it. So those are our first kind of 3 phases of where we're going. Phase 1 and phase 2 will be first half of next year, fully deployed, and then it really just depends on momentum to get that phase 3 kicked in.
I think it's interesting that every time you turn on the news at this point, something's happened at a school, something's happened, at work. We just had another mass shooting in Orlando last night. I woke up to this morning. It's 45 minutes away from where I live. And I think that speaks to a lot of what you guys are looking to solve, number one. But even if it's just an awareness situation, we didn't deal with this when I was a kid. Like this wasn't around. I'm sure it was, and I'm sure that mental health issues were there, but they just didn't manifest themselves the way that they do today, for whatever the reason. I don't know what that reason is. But I also think that part of the reason why things are different today too is because there's not as much of a personal relationship with people as there used to be. Because back when I was a kid, you played outside with your friends. You walked to the school bus and you rode the bus with your friends and you played Little League with your friends. You weren't playing online games. You didn't have your face buried in a phone. And so you were probably a little bit more aware of things that were going on. But even then, we just, we dealt with things in real time. Like bullying wasn't a thing. Like you've gotten a fist fight in the neighborhood, you solved it and you were back playing a couple hours later or the next day. But I think that today we operate in silos to a certain degree, in that it scares the daylights out of me, even from the dating aspect. Having a little girl, not that I shouldn't be worried about my boys, but being a father's daughter, you have a little different perspective when you have a girl in the house at that point. But I look at this in kids are forming their relationships online. They're not forming them in person. So you go from 0 to 1,000 when you finally get around each other. There is no like dating or incubation period. It's like the mental bond has already been created in the feelings and emotions that surround that. And I just feel like if you have the ability to educate people, even if it's just signs or signals that people are giving off for them to pay attention and notice, that a lot of this can probably be nipped in the bud early on. But we have to have people who are willing to pay attention and willing to notice and willing to be educated and then actually act on that. And I don't know how the general public perceives that, honestly. It's going to be very interesting to see, because, I think that we all, to a certain degree, feel some responsibility to our teams, even as just teammates. Obviously, I do as the agency principal, but if I'm working side by side in a cubicle farm with somebody and I feel like they're a little bit off, I'm the type that's going to ask them, "Hey, man, what's going on?" Or, "Hey, anything you need to get off your mind or whatever." But I'm also a fairly observant person when it comes to stuff like that. I see so many times we get our heads down, we live in our virtual world, and we're drones at the office just trying to get our work done and not looking left, not looking right. And the next thing you know, you've got some sort of a major event, or, God forbid, this person is dealing with massive anxiety or depression, and they end up in a situation where they're contemplating taking their own life or whatever else. And I feel like we all have a certain responsibility to our fellow humans to, be engaged to a certain level, and kind of look out for each other. But it's tough, man. I mean, look at what's going on with everything. I'm not a political person. It's really nobody's business what my political beliefs are. They're mine, and that's all that matters. But look how divided the country is just over a stupid election, and we can even go back 20 years and it wasn't like that. Go back 40 years and it definitely wasn't like it is today. And yet that's the new normal. And, it seems like you see that kind of divisiveness in almost any issue. It doesn't even have to be political. It's like you have to pick a side. Nobody can think with an open mind. You have to determine who you're going to have your allegiance with and who you're not. And I don't know, man. I know I'm rambling about just a lot of random things, but I feel like there's a need for what you guys are doing, and it's going to be really interesting to watch how this takes an effect. And Justin's 100% right. Agencies are a massive distribution model that have huge reach into their local communities. At this point, digital to a certain degree, but also in and of themselves. We're in a very high pressure industry. It's a great industry. It rewards you monetarily for your hard work, but I don't think anybody likes having production pressure put on them. And we're in a hard market right now, and we only have so many hours in a day. I think that the insurance industry, by and large, is very susceptible for a lot of this stuff to manifest itself in a way that it hasn't in the past, just on current market conditions.
Yeah, I would just add too that one of the challenges, obviously, with so many having gone remote work and that mixed remote and in person, I've always been an advocate for in person, but it's always been from the mental health aspect side of it. You have so many of our service side of the equation industry employees that are introverted by nature. And when you take at a 60-70% of our workforce is introverted, and you put them virtually where they're not sitting around with anybody else, it's not as if in most cases they're going and developing this vibrant friend network. And it is very difficult to do what you would do and check in when somebody isn't doing well, when you're doing it over a monitor on a scheduled meeting with an agenda. And so, one of the reasons that hopefully people care regardless is the fact that since 55% of the people struggling right now in this country aren't getting the mental health treatment they need despite struggling with mental health illnesses, we have $5 billion a year we're losing in absenteeism and presenteeism by not addressing the problem. So in case you don't care about the people, you got to care about your bottom line. And and this is so rampant that the good news though is I am talking to more and more agency owners, leadership, and this goes all the way to the largest agencies in the world. They are interested, dialed in, ready to support. I can tell you, David, all three of the main agency management systems have all come out and had personal conversations with me that says, we will act as a distribution network. We are all in to get this out as well. And so I think the very nature of our community and how we work together is going to be a real advantage in getting the messaging out and getting the resources there.
That's awesome. Brendan, you look like you were going to say something when Justin started.
Sorry, Brendan.
Oh, hey, this is how these conversations go, because they are so polarizing, but the three of us are in a different world than the majority of people who are open to talking about this. And David, you mentioned the kids, home environments, work pressures. We expect people to hear this message, right? And we hope that they do, and they hope that they take advantage of that. But a lot of people aren't in environments to where they feel comfortable talking about this, right? Whether it's in a 5-minute check-in Zoom or in person, or even, David, if you ask them if they're okay, they're going to say, oh, I'm fine, right? Because that's their nature. So the training program will give employees the awareness on how to identify, ask the right questions, all the while we also hope, and I think kind of one of the unintended benefits is that on the ground level, these people are also now taking home that knowledge, right? And they're interacting differently with their families, right? It might be a high pressured environment in their work life, but if we give them the tools and the resources, that conversation with their daughter about dating might go a little bit different based upon some of the tools. Or if the daughter says she has been struggling, how do we have those conversations? So, it's also not just about, the today, because that's certainly important and we want that community and those resources available, but also what's that trickle down effect for that next generation? And how are we changing the resources and conversations that are happening? Because of course, if I go home and I had a terrible day, that's going to change the conversation with my kids, my family, my spouse, my parents. And then maybe I don't work out, maybe I eat bad, I sleep bad, and then I wake up and it's a repeatable cycle. And I come back to work grumpy, annoyed, frustrated, maybe I drank too much. So again, it's trying to give tools, community aspects to help kind of break the cycle, knowledge and resources. So, it's just, and we hope that it reaches people, really is the goal. Like we want that community, we want that knowledge to get to people. And a lot of these agencies, the largest ones, they've done a ton of work to try to release EAP programs, which are really wonderful for what they are, but are employees using it?
Well, you actually just stole the words right out of my mouth, because that's what I was going to say. Employee assistance programs have been around for a really long time, but how many people actually even know what they are, number one, and number two, how to access them or use them, and then number three, have a comfort level of talking to somebody at work who's typically going to be in a position of authority over them about utilizing that stuff. I think that it's even though it shouldn't be, I think there's a lot of barriers to entry for people to get help they need that way that may just be perceived. But I think that it's real, man, because I can go back 20, 25 years and I know that the companies that I worked for had them, but it was almost like we needed to have that to check the box that we were offering it. And I hate to say that, but let's call it what it is. Like, I don't know that it's really, I don't know that I've ever worked for an employer that has sat everybody down and educated them on exactly what this stuff is, what the benefits are, how you access it, and then attempt to give people some sort of a comfort level as to why it would make sense for them to do that. I think that having real conversation with people who may be struggling with similar or the same and repeating those conversations on public platforms over and over again are what begin to break those barriers down. But if I look at, EAPs as far as they've existed in my adult working life, I've never had to use one or access one. I wouldn't know how. I also don't know of anybody who has. And I think that's kind of weird because I've worked for some really big companies before. And if that's really a benefit that you're offering and pushing, you would think there would be some level of utilization. Obviously, a company can't come out and say, oh, by the way, Christine used our EAP for this week. And, you can't do that. But, again, it goes back to what I said, man. COVID changed things for the good in some ways, and it changed it for the bad in others. And the water cooler talk and the hanging out with people in the break room, having the informal conversations is really something that I think has changed how people interact, for the foreseeable future. If it ever gets back to the way it was before. And, you lose a lot at that point. You don't know the things that are really going on with people like you used to. I used to know who won Little League and what was going on with kids' dance recitals and all of that stuff, because it would just come up in conversation when you're around people for 8 hours a day. When you're not, you're focusing on the task at hand. And I think sometimes people don't realize how good it was to have a sounding board or people there that they could vent to, or even just have an informal conversation with, and feel like they're isolated on their own at this point in some cases.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, the EAP programs, I've never worked for any of those big companies that offered it, but, in hearing from enough people, no, it's, on page 117, section 32C, right? And it's like, it's a, it's a page or two long, but it's hard to find, it's hard to access. And also, it doesn't feel like a priority. So, am I going to use it? And then if I'm going to, do I feel comfortable enough to use those without the fear of the leadership or my boss finding out
Yeah,
about me?
retaliation. I think people would probably be scared to death. The company, oh, wow, this person's got a drinking problem. We need to get rid of them before it gets worse. That's probably what people think.
And that might not even be the case, but I think
Right.
that's fear that people are holding and not using it. So, and then the flip side is, I personally work for a boss who I can get to be very open with, right? Regan is wonderful in a lot of ways about my mental health and allows me to do these types of things. But that's also not the case for a lot of small companies, right? The smaller it gets, sometimes it also becomes even harder to talk to that boss. So this is hopefully kind of bridging that gap from a large agency. Do you feel comfortable using EAP? No. Well, here's a resource, here's some training, but also here's a community. And then from the bottom, kind of smaller agency side is, hey, don't like, we have that community. Come ask a question in the platform. Hey, I'm struggling. I've been depressed. I've been drinking at work. Does anybody have any ideas or solutions on maybe ways that I can engage with my boss in a meaningful way? And then the community can offer some suggestions. Like, how powerful could that really be?
Yeah, and I think when you have, community-based things like that, the credibility of the people that you're interacting with is through the roof, man. I mean, I look at I I look at what we do inside a Killing commercial with the fact we've got a private social network and like literally everything's kept in the family in there. There's a reason why I have geographic exclusivity and will only work with one agency within an hour radius of another one. And it's because I want to protect that culture and have the free flowing communication and collaboration that we have. And I feel like, all it takes is one person to put themselves out there and break the ice. And then boom, next thing you know, conversations flowing like crazy. So I mean, I can only imagine that, and especially some of these people have been carrying stuff around for a long time, just wishing they had somebody they could talk to. And now they get an ear and it's like, holy cow, you've been carrying around a lot for a long time. I'm sorry, I wish we would have met sooner or whatever, but um, I think it's a really a needed thing. And I mean, even if you had some level of education around EAPs, like, hey, this community is a great sounding board for you, but if you need formal, professional help, you may want to check with your employer if they offer an employee assistance program. This is what that looks like. This is why you shouldn't be concerned about utilizing it, and give people that boost of confidence they need to seek the help that they probably really need, in addition to the community to support them. And I think that, a lot of times people are paying medical benefits premiums, both the company and the employee contribution. This is a benefit you're paying for. You should use it, right? But to your point, you're not always going to be able to get those resources, on a one-off situation. I don't know if you guys are, either one of you are connected with me on Facebook, and I'm not nearly as open personally on LinkedIn as I am on Facebook. But my youngest son has very significant special needs. Like when he was 18 months old, we didn't know if he would live to see 10 years old or not because of his neurological issues. And thank God, he did not have progressive white brain disease, but he's a lifer. He'll always live with us. And I think one of the reasons why I'm as open as I am is because I go to all of these IEP meetings. I see all of the resources that are available in the school system that the average child doesn't get because they don't have parents that are advocating for them, like Andrea and I advocate for Ethan. And by all means, she gets all the credit for that. She's way more I'm the muscle man. Like if I show up to the meeting, it's the nuclear option. Like, I let her handle it, but she also works with, people who have special needs for a living. So she's mentally designed to deal with things that I'm not, and she's got far more patience. But even with Ethan and having to get some of the behavioral therapy and the other things that we've needed for him, for resources, it's almost a full-time job for her just to stay on the phones trying to find somebody who takes insurance. But even that doesn't matter. We can afford to pay whatever we need to pay if it has to be out of pocket. The next thing is finding somebody who has capacity that's taking on new patients. I mean, if I was looking for a career path going out of high school and getting ready to go into college, and I felt like, working with people was something I'd want to do, man, I think you could go into psychology, psychiatry, counseling, therapy, behavioral therapy, any of that stuff. And it seems like you wouldn't have a problem finding a job anywhere because we've been on wait lists after wait list after wait list. And just, she's like Chinese water torture, man. She just chips away at him until she beats him into submission and we get what we want. But, there's a lot of people that don't have that. And it's gut wrenching to go to the school and sit through an IEP meeting and know how hard you're fighting for your child to get the resources that they're entitled to get. And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, for every one of him, there's probably 24 that don't have parents that are willing to come in, or even, I shouldn't even say willing, able. Thank God I'm married to somebody who deals with public school systems for all of the things that she does in her career, so she knows how to navigate it. But a lot of people don't even know where to begin with that stuff. So again, education is huge. It's, I think the fundamental issue we have with literally everything in life has to do with not taking the time to educate people and people not taking the time to learn. Like even in the insurance game, man, I don't have to sell you policies. I just have to tell you what your problems are and prove to you I know how to help you fix them. Insurance is just how I get paid. That's not really what we do. We're going to come in and show you what the issues are with your workers' comp and everything else, but we take the time. We're not worried about hitting the deal and moving on to the next one because we're trying to get as many done this month as we can. And I think this is the same thing, man. We're so used to an instant gratification society that we expect results on things right away. And when we don't get them, we tend to shy away from the activities that don't give us instant gratification.
Yeah. KG.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. And I think just to add to your point, David, it goes back to when our kids aren't okay, we're not okay, right? And so this challenge that we've seen post-COVID is the kids are not doing okay by and large. And that's just the every average day kid is struggling with mental health issues. The social media is a problem, all of these things. And so it's incumbent upon us to make sure that our employees are taken care of. And the only way they'll be taken care of is that we support them because, when those kids aren't doing well, they're not doing well, and they need resources and they need the help. And again, oftentimes, unless you have parents that are extremely proactive with the financial resources and hopefully the know-how or some connection, you are left on an island unto yourself. And I think it's so powerful that you're sharing all of that out there, because I can't imagine the number of times you've had conversations and people are asking about IEPs and you're like, I'm just telling you our story, but that community where you can share that so someone else ears perked up and says, oh, me too, I'm going through that, or I know somebody, now we can get the resources. And so, yeah, I just think that's incredible what you guys have been doing there.
Yeah, I think social media has made it a little easier too with Facebook groups and things like that, because it's really kind of interesting. One of Ethan's diagnoses is he's got an agenesis of the corpus callosum, which is the superconductor in your brain that connects the right and left sides and allows him to process things. So there's things he's really, really smart at and things that he has like literally no, common sense with, or, it's very interesting to watch. But it's so specific. Like my wife's in a couple of different groups where it's all parents of kids who have this exact same diagnosis that were born in the same year. So you're literally going through and reading what these other parents are going through, and it's the exact same things that you're dealing with your child. You know, not everything's exactly the same, but it's really kind of interesting to see. And you know, I for as much as I think social, you know, detracts from human interaction the way that I would prefer it, I also think that it's brought down boundaries on a lot of things too, because I don't know that people, if you were to put them in a room together to have those conversations, that those conversations would feel the same. I think that people feel a certain level of protection when they're, you know, behind the keyboard and the monitor, like all of a sudden, you know, you're not being vulnerable when you're being equally as vulnerable. It's just easier to do it.
Yeah. One of the things, you know, kind of, I think that speaks to the exact purpose also of why the community and others not feeling so alone is so important. You know, for Andrea to be a part of those Facebook groups, even if she never typed one word, just knowing that there are other families who are going through that, who had kids who were born in the same year, is incredibly powerful for her to learn from their experiences, what they're talking about. You know, we're building this platform, but I don't expect everybody to comment and chat and learn. You know, we're going to have plenty of people who just come because they don't want to feel alone about their alcoholism, about their bipolar. And that is a totally correct, David, in that the social media has given us access to a lot of wonderful things. So people can feel like they are a part of a group, even if they never communicate, but they can at least learn, understand, and experience from others so that they maybe don't feel alone in their work environment or when they go home. Like, super powerful stuff to be a part of those. Like, I'm a part of a couple Facebook groups, and yeah, like it's amazing. I don't comment all the time, but I just listen. I read and listen, you know, in a lot of ways. And it's just interesting to be able to see and hear others and their experiences.
So we've been going about an hour, and I want to be respectful of your time. And truthfully, I've got another podcast coming up, as we know. But you know, where do people find out more? Do you have a landing page up right now or anything? Or is this more of a stay tuned? We're going to make some announcements and you'll know about it when the time comes. Because certainly, you know, I'll pledge to you guys right now, I'll happily put this out to my email blast list as soon as everything's ready to go and formalized, to make sure we're getting you as much awareness as we possibly can. But if there's a way for people to sign up for a newsletter or, you know, be part of a wait list to get information when the community comes out, how do they find out more?
So it's real simple. Project55.org. Project55.org is where everything is. That's where they can go and join the community right now. And then the real ask is get involved, take a look as we build that out. But then anybody who's part of that community, in addition to what you may see on social media, will get the updates as the training program is being developed and when we're going to launch, and get the resources to all those users.
Yeah,
Awesome.
It is live. So everybody could go there now and they could sign up and utilize the, you know, the website, but then also the internal kind of community page. But as Justin said, the actual training won't be available until like April.
All good, man. I think you need to build your base and get people in the ecosystem and get them ready for it. So we'll make sure we put that web address and link in the show notes. Fellas, thank you so much. Good conversation today. Certainly we'll have you back in the spring when that launches so that we can talk about it again at that point as well. But good luck to you, man. I'm pulling for you guys. I'll do anything I can to get behind you and support you. And just look forward to watching you make waves where they need to be made, both inside the industry and otherwise. So kudos to you for taking the first step. A lot of people had that opportunity and haven't. So you guys are certainly pioneers for that.
Thanks, DC.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
All right, guys, we'll catch you next time. See ya.